The genesis of the Boeing B-29 Superfortress began in the shadow of growing geopolitical uncertainty in the late 1930s. As global tensions escalated and total war seemed increasingly inevitable, American military planners recognized the need for a bomber capable of strategic operations far beyond the reach of the existing fleet. The B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator, though effective within certain parameters, lacked the range and payload necessary for operations in the vast expanses of the Pacific or deep into fortified enemy territory. The U.S. Army Air Corps, under the vision of leaders like General Henry Hap Arnold, saw the necessity of creating an entirely new class of bomber, faster, higher flying, longer range, and capable of carrying a larger payload than anything before it. In January 1940, the Air Corps issued a formal request for proposals for a new super bomber. The specification called for a pressurized cabin, remote-controlled defensive armament, a 5,000-mile range, and a maximum speed of 400 miles per hour, requirements that exceeded the capabilities of any existing aircraft. Boeing responded with its Model 345, an advanced design that would ultimately become the B-29. Development began in earnest before the United States formally entered World War II, a reflection of the urgency with which the military viewed long-range strategic bombing. Key figures in Boeing's engineering division, most notably Edward Wells and the legendary test pilot Edmund T. Eddie Allen, oversaw the ambitious project. The Superfortress would feature numerous unprecedented design features. Among them was a fully pressurized crew compartment, which would allow flight at altitudes over 30,000 feet for extended periods. It also included remote-controlled gun turrets, operated via a sophisticated analog computing system, and a high aspect ratio wing designed for efficiency at high altitude. The aircraft was to be powered by the Wright R3350 duplex Cyclone engine, one of the most powerful radial engines ever developed. However, this choice, while promising, introduced significant engineering challenges. The R3350 was plagued with overheating and reliability issues, leading to frequent engine fires and flight test delays. Still, the promise of superior performance kept the program moving forward. By 1941, as war with Japan loomed closer, the B-29 program received top priority status, with the U.S. government investing over $3 billion, more than the cost of the Manhattan Project itself. This made the B-29 the most expensive weapons program of the war. A vast industrial infrastructure was built to support its production, including entirely new factories in Wichita, Kansas, Renton, Washington, and Marietta, Georgia. Thousands of engineers, technicians, and assembly workers were mobilized to bring the bomber into existence, often working under immense pressure and time constraints. Despite the urgency, the project faced consistent delays. The complexity of the aircraft, especially the engine integration and pressurization systems, meant that timelines had to be repeatedly adjusted. Boeing test pilots and Army Air Forces observers remained committed, recognizing that if the aircraft could be brought to operational maturity, it would change the calculus of the war, particularly against Japan, where conventional bombing from bases thousands of miles away was logistically prohibitive. The strategic logic behind the B-29's development was clear. Planners envisioned that if a bomber could fly from secure bases in China or remote Pacific islands and strike industrial centers in Japan, it could cripple the enemy's war-making capacity without the need for a costly and prolonged ground invasion. Precision bombing, particularly of steel production, aircraft factories, and energy infrastructure, was believed to be the key to forcing Japan's surrender. As 1942 drew to a close, the B-29 program remained an exercise in both hope and frustration. Ground testing had begun in earnest, but the first flight had yet to occur. The scale of the undertaking, combined with the ambition of its design, meant the B-29's path from blueprint to battlefield would be longer and more difficult than initially imagined. Yet the strategic imperative remained unshaken. The United States needed an aircraft that could bring overwhelming force to bear at intercontinental ranges. What began as a theoretical leap in strategic bombing was rapidly becoming a reality under the strain of global war. In the coming years, the B-29 would not only enter service, it would become the most advanced and consequential bomber of the Second World War. But first, it would have to prove itself in the air. through a gauntlet of test flights, mechanical setbacks, and accelerated production on an industrial scale. The next chapter in the story of the Superfortress would be defined not by design alone, but by its performance under pressure. The first flight of the B-29 prototype took place on September 21, 1942, at Boeing Field in Seattle. Piloted by Eddie Allen, the aircraft lifted off successfully, validating years of design effort. However, early test flights exposed serious problems, especially with the Wright R3350 engines. These engines, while capable of delivering over 2,200 horsepower, were prone to overheating and engine fires, particularly in the outboard nacelles. The airflow over the cylinders was insufficient at high power settings, and the problem was compounded by the engine's tight integration into the wing structure, making in-flight fires difficult to contain. These issues culminated in a major tragedy on February 18, 1943, when the second prototype crashed during a test flight, killing Eddie Allen and 10 others aboard, as well as civilians on the ground. The accident was attributed to an engine fire that led to structural failure of the wing. The event shocked the aviation community and prompted a thorough re-evaluation of engine cooling and fire suppression systems. Modifications were made to the cowl flaps, nacelle airflow, and exhaust arrangement to mitigate the risks. Though engine reliability remained a concern throughout the B-29's operational life. Despite these setbacks, the U.S. Army Air Forces, under immense pressure to deliver a long-range bomber for the Pacific Theater, pressed forward with the program. Test flights continued with improved prototypes, and adjustments were made almost continuously. Boeing, under government pressure, began pre-production manufacturing even as testing remained incomplete. The urgency of wartime necessity overrode the usual development cycles, leading to the rare situation where aircraft were being built and delivered to units while still undergoing major design refinement. The YB-29, a pre-production model, incorporated critical changes derived from the prototype evaluations. It retained the pressurized compartments for the flight crew, bombardier, and gunners, and introduced the central tunnel connecting the front and rear compartments above the bomb bays, a solution to maintaining pressure integrity throughout the aircraft. The remote-controlled gun system, developed by General Electric, featured analog computing sites and could be controlled from multiple stations simultaneously, offering overlapping fields of fire. It was one of the most sophisticated defensive systems ever installed on a bomber up to that point. To expedite production, new assembly plants were constructed and rapidly scaled. Boeing's Wichita plant became the primary production site, complemented by Bell Aircraft in Georgia and Glen L. Martin in Nebraska. Each facility faced enormous logistical and engineering challenges, not least of which was training a workforce capable of assembling such a complex machine. The B-29 had more than 55,000 individual parts and over 140 miles of wiring, making its construction a feat of industrial coordination. Testing continued through 1943 and into early 1944. The aircraft's flight characteristics were generally favorable: stable at altitude, responsive for its size, and capable of maintaining speed and altitude with a full bomb load. However, the engines remained a limiting factor, requiring vigilant maintenance and strict operating procedures. Ground crews became adept at inspecting for cylinder head cracks, oil leaks, and worn bearings. Despite the problems, confidence in the airframe's overall design remained strong. In April 1944, the first operational B-29s began arriving at newly formed units. The 58th Bomb Wing, stationed in India, was designated as the lead formation for early combat trials against Japan. Their mission, codenamed Operation Matterhorn, would involve flying from bases in India over the Himalayas, known as the Hump, to forward airfields in China, and from there, conducting bombing raids on targets in the Japanese home islands. It was a daunting logistical challenge, requiring fuel, bombs, and parts to be flown over the mountains to sustain each raid. The transition from prototype to production had not been smooth. Yet by mid-1944, the B-29 was operational, an aircraft built to push the limits of what heavy bombers could do. Its pressurized interior, advanced fire control systems, and massive range marked it as the most advanced bomber of its time. But its true capabilities would not be demonstrated in test flights or ground evaluations. They would be proven under fire, on missions deep into hostile territory, in a campaign unlike any before it. The era of the Superfortress had begun, not just as a technological marvel, but as a weapon of strategic consequence. The B-29's entry into operational service marked a significant shift in American air power strategy, particularly in the Pacific Theater, where geography and distance had long limited offensive capability. The first combat deployment began with the 58th Bomb Wing under the 20th Air Force, which conducted missions from bases in India and forward positions in China. This arrangement, however, posed immense logistical hurdles. Each bombing sortie over Japan required transporting fuel, bombs, and supplies across the treacherous Himalayan mountain range using other B-29s, often at a ratio of 12 supply flights to support one combat mission. The effort strained resources and highlighted the inadequacies of relying on Chinese airfields so close to the war's front lines. Despite the logistical burden, the first B-29 combat mission took place on June 5, 1944, targeting railway facilities in Bangkok, Thailand. It was followed by the first bombing of Japan on June 15, when B-29 struck the Imperial Iron and Steel Works in Yawata, Kyushu. Though the damage was limited and the weather reduced bombing accuracy, the mission was a psychological turning point. It marked the first air attack on the Japanese home islands since the Doolittle Raid of 1942. It also confirmed the feasibility of long-range strategic bombing from distant bases, even under adverse conditions. However, it soon became clear that the Matterhorn strategy was unsustainable. Weather, range limits, and enemy defenses made operations from China inefficient and vulnerable. By late 1944, US forces captured the Mariana Islands, specifically Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, which allowed for the construction of extensive airfields capable of hosting large numbers of B-29s. These islands were far closer to Japan and could be reliably supplied by sea, eliminating the need for the arduous overland logistical chain through the Himalayas. The transfer of B-29 operations to the Marianas was a strategic turning point. The new bases became fully operational in November 1944, and from them, the 20th Air Force launched direct bombing raids on the Japanese mainland. These missions initially followed the high-altitude, daylight precision bombing doctrine refined over Europe. However, Japan's weather patterns, with frequent overcast conditions and strong jet stream winds, made such tactics less effective. Bombing accuracy was poor, and results were limited, despite the massive tonnage dropped. In response, the US command, now under General Curtis LeMay, made a critical doctrinal shift. LeMay, recognizing the limitations of high-altitude precision bombing over Japan, ordered a transition to low-altitude, nighttime incendiary raids. These missions targeted Japanese urban centers, which were largely constructed of wood and paper. The first of these, the firebombing of Tokyo on the night of March 9–10, 1945, became the deadliest single bombing raid of the war. Over 300 B-29s dropped incendiaries on a densely populated area of the city, igniting a firestorm that killed an estimated 100,000 people and destroyed over 15 square miles. This operation demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of the B-29 in urban destruction campaigns. Following Tokyo, similar raids were conducted against Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and dozens of other cities. The B-29s operated at altitudes of 5,000 to 9,000 feet, often without bomb sights or fighter escort, relying on sheer volume and proximity to maximize effect. While this shift increased bomb effectiveness and sortie rates, it also raised significant ethical questions that continue to be debated by historians. Throughout this phase, the B-29 proved itself as a reliable heavy bomber capable of carrying massive bomb loads over distances exceeding 3,000 miles round trip. The aircraft's pressurized cabin allowed crews to operate more effectively at high altitude, while its defensive armament, though less emphasized during night raids, offered reasonable protection when needed. Mechanical issues, particularly with engines, persisted, but had been significantly reduced through maintenance refinements and operational experience. By mid-1945, the B-29 had become the centerpiece of America's strategic campaign against Japan. Its missions disrupted industry, communications, transportation, and civilian morale on an unprecedented scale. Yet even as conventional bombing intensified, a new dimension to the B-29's role was quietly taking shape. selected aircraft were being modified under a top-secret program known as Silverplate to deliver a weapon unlike any other. The B-29 would not only redefine strategic bombing, it would become the platform for the most consequential missions in modern military history. The transition from area bombing to atomic warfare was approaching, and the Superfortress stood at the center of that transformation. As the strategic bombing campaign intensified in mid-1945, the B-29 Superfortress was already inflicting devastating damage on Japanese infrastructure and population centers. Dozens of cities were targeted in a relentless effort to force Japan into unconditional surrender. While the firebombing raids achieved massive destruction, decimating industrial districts, crippling transportation networks, and killing hundreds of thousands, Japan's leadership remained unwilling to capitulate. Against this backdrop, the B-29 was tasked with an entirely new and singular role: the delivery of the world's first atomic weapons. The Manhattan Project, under the leadership of General Leslie Groves and physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, had been progressing in parallel with the B-29's development. As early as 1943, the Army Air Forces and the Manhattan Project began coordinating plans to deliver a nuclear device by air. The B-29 was identified early on as the only existing aircraft with the size, range, and payload capacity necessary to carry the atomic bomb. However, extensive modifications would be required to accommodate the unique weight, shape, and release characteristics of the new weapons. This led to the development of the Silverplate program, an initiative to produce specially modified B-29s capable of carrying nuclear ordnance. These aircraft were stripped of all defensive armament except the tailgun to reduce weight, fitted with new propellers for better high-altitude performance, and equipped with modified bomb bays, electrical systems, and arming circuits. A total of 65 Silverplate B-29s were produced, each individually tested and assigned to the 509th Composite Group, a specially formed unit based on Tinian Island in the Marianas. The 509th was composed of hand-picked crews trained in utmost secrecy. They rehearsed high-altitude bombing runs with inert pumpkin bombs, which matched the dimensions and ballistics of the actual atomic weapons. The unit's commander, Colonel Paul Tibbets, was closely involved in both operational planning and the integration of Manhattan Project components into aerial doctrine. Security was tightly maintained, with most personnel unaware of the true nature of the weapons they were preparing to use. On August 6, 1945, at 08:15 local time, the B-29 Enola Gay, piloted by Tibbets, released the atomic bomb Little Boy over the city of Hiroshima. The detonation, at an altitude of approximately 1,900 feet, resulted in the immediate deaths of an estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people, with total casualties due to burns, radiation sickness, and injury, eventually exceeding 140,000. The city's infrastructure was annihilated within minutes, and a firestorm consumed what remained. It was the first use of a nuclear weapon in warfare. 3 days later, on August 9th, the B-29 Boxcar, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney, dropped a second bomb, Fat Man, over Nagasaki. The original target, Kokura, was obscured by clouds and smoke, forcing the crew to proceed to the secondary target. The bomb exploded with even greater yield than its predecessor, but struck a less densely populated area, resulting in an estimated 40,000 to 75,000 deaths. Despite the weather complications and navigation issues, the mission confirmed that the B-29 could reliably deliver nuclear weapons under combat conditions. These two missions marked the culmination of a technological and strategic arc that had begun with the theoretical concept of long-range strategic bombing. The B-29, originally envisioned as a conventional bomber, had been transformed into a delivery system for the most powerful weapons ever devised. The aircraft's combination of range, altitude, and precision had made it uniquely suited to atomic delivery, even though it had not been designed with that purpose in mind. The impact of these missions was immediate and profound. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced its unconditional surrender, ending World War II. While debates about the necessity and morality of the bombings continue to this day, there is no dispute that the B-29 was the platform that enabled their execution. Its role in altering the course of global conflict was now cemented. Following the bombings, the 509th Composite Group conducted further atomic training flights and began preparing for additional missions in case Japan did not surrender. Additional bombs were under assembly, and further targets had been identified. The B-29 was central to this contingency planning, which illustrates how fully integrated it had become into America's nuclear doctrine. Even in its earliest hours, the combat use of the B-29 extended beyond these two atomic missions. Even after August 1945, conventional raids continued over Japan until the formal surrender was signed aboard the USS Missouri in September. Throughout the campaign, the B-29 demonstrated not just destructive capability, but logistical mastery, strategic reach, and technological sophistication. Its adaptability, from high-altitude precision bombing to low-level incendiary raids, and finally to nuclear delivery, was unmatched. As the war ended, the B-29 stood as the most advanced operational aircraft in the world, a machine that had transcended its original role. Its success was a result of engineering excellence, doctrinal flexibility, and the capacity of its crews to adapt to rapidly shifting wartime demands. Yet its role in nuclear warfare also positioned it at the heart of a new global reality, one defined not just by conventional armies and industrial output, but by the unprecedented scale of destruction that a single bomber could unleash. The end of World War II did not mark the end of the B-29 Superfortress's service. Instead, the aircraft transitioned from a wartime instrument into a centerpiece of early Cold War air power. As the United States began to define its post-war military doctrine, the B-29 remained at the forefront of long-range strategic capability. It was the only aircraft in the U.S. inventory capable of delivering atomic weapons, and thus became the backbone of the newly established Strategic Air Command, SAC, in 1946. For a time, it was the core of America's nuclear deterrent. The original B-29s continued to undergo refinements. The most significant post-war upgrade was the B-29D, later redesignated the B-50. This variant featured more powerful Pratt & Whitney R-4360 radial engines, a taller vertical stabilizer, strengthened wings, and other structural improvements. While externally similar to the B-29, the B-50 was effectively a new aircraft in terms of performance and reliability. It could fly faster, higher, and farther than its predecessor, making it better suited for the emerging strategic requirements of the early Cold War. The B-29 also served as a platform for numerous specialized variants. The KB-29 tanker was among the most important, equipped with early aerial refueling systems that extended the range of bombers and fighters. These tankers played a foundational role in establishing global reach for SAC aircraft and set the stage for more advanced refueling systems used in later decades. Other derivatives included weather reconnaissance versions, WB-29, photographic and electronic intelligence aircraft, RB-29, and trainer models. Notably, the B-29 was central to the development of early missile and drone technology. Under programs such as MX-774 and MX-771, the aircraft was used as a mothership for experimental guided weapons and early cruise missile concepts. In the 1950s, B-29s were used to carry and drop prototype drones, including versions of the JB-2 Loon, a US copy of the German V-1 flying bomb. These tests laid the groundwork for future air-launched missile systems and unmanned aerial vehicles. The aircraft also supported high-altitude balloon projects and nuclear testing operations. Modified B-29s served as sampling platforms, flying through radioactive clouds following test detonations to collect data. Others carried instrumentation or monitoring equipment used in the observation of test sites. The aircraft's range, internal volume, and ability to operate at altitudes above 30,000 feet made it uniquely valuable for these scientific and strategic missions. Internationally, the B-29 had a brief but notable presence. The Royal Air Force received several B-29s on loan, operating them under the designation Washington B-1 from 1950 to 1954. These aircraft filled a gap in British strategic capabilities until indigenous designs such as the Vickers Valiant and Avro Vulcan became operational. The Soviet Union, having reverse-engineered a handful of interned B-29s that made emergency landings in Soviet territory during the war, developed the Tupolev Tu-4, a near-exact copy of the Superfortress. The Tu-4 became the USSR's first long-range bomber capable of delivering nuclear weapons, and remained in service into the 1960s. Despite its innovations, the B-29's operational limitations became apparent by the early 1950s. It lacked jet propulsion and was increasingly vulnerable to advanced jet fighters and surface-to-air missiles. During the Korean War, B-29s were initially deployed to great effect, conducting conventional bombing raids on North Korean infrastructure and troop positions. However, the introduction of Soviet MiG-15 jet fighters soon revealed the aircraft's vulnerability. B-29 losses mounted, and missions had to be shifted to nighttime or lower-risk targets. This marked the end of the Superfortress's role as a frontline strategic bomber. The B-29 was gradually phased out of frontline service by the mid-1950s. Its successor, the B-47 Stratojet, brought swept wings, jet engines, and supersonic capabilities, features necessary for survival in an era of radar-guided defenses and nuclear brinkmanship. By 1960, nearly all B-29s and B-50s had been retired from active duty, with a few surviving as testbeds or target drones. Yet the aircraft's legacy was already secured. The B-29 had bridged the era between World War II and the Cold War, serving as both a weapon of total war and a vehicle of nuclear deterrence. It had adapted to a wide range of roles: bomber, tanker, reconnaissance, testbed, and trainer, demonstrating an unmatched versatility. Its technology, crew structure, and operating concepts shaped decades of bomber development, from the B-36 Peacemaker to the B-52 Superfortress and beyond. As the strategic landscape evolved, the B-29's role as a direct combat platform faded, but its influence remained embedded in the very structure of American and global air doctrine. It had done more than drop bombs. It had redefined the boundaries of what an aircraft could achieve in both war and peace. The legacy of the B-29 Superfortress extends beyond its strategic and technological contributions into the realm of public memory, preservation, and cultural significance. As the aircraft was withdrawn from frontline service, a new mission emerged: to preserve its history, educate future generations, and maintain the legacy of one of the most transformative bombers in aviation history. This process began with a few preserved airframes, but evolved into a widespread recognition of the B-29's enduring impact. Following retirement, the majority of B-29s were scrapped or used as static targets for weapons testing. By the early 1960s, only a handful of examples remained intact, and fewer still were in restorable condition. Aviation museums, veterans groups, and historical societies began campaigns to recover and preserve surviving aircraft. These efforts often involved locating abandoned airframes in remote areas, such as the deserts of Arizona or the Pacific Islands, where derelict bombers had been left since World War II. Recovering them required significant logistical coordination, funding, and technical expertise. One of the most notable success stories in B-29 preservation is the aircraft known as Fifi. Rescued and restored by the Commemorative Air Force, KF, in the 1970s, Fifi became one of the first airworthy B-29s to return to the skies after decades of dormancy. Another aircraft, Doc, was meticulously restored over nearly 2 decades and returned to flight status in 2016. These 2 aircraft represent the only flight-capable B-29s currently in operation, and they serve as airborne museums, participating in air shows, flyovers, and educational tours across the United States. In parallel, static B-29s are displayed in aviation museums around the world, including the National Museum of the United States Air Force, the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, and museums in the UK and Australia. Each preserved airframe serves as a focal point for interpreting the aircraft's technological innovation, combat history, and ethical legacy. Restored interiors, gunner stations, and bomb bays allow visitors to appreciate the complexity and scale of the aircraft firsthand. The cultural representation of the B-29 has also shaped its legacy. It has been prominently featured in films, documentaries, books, and video games. Notably, the 1980s film Enola Gay and numerous documentaries about the atomic bombings have kept public awareness of the aircraft's most consequential missions alive. These portrayals often provoke reflection on the moral implications of strategic bombing and nuclear warfare, tying the machine to debates far beyond aviation history. Veterans who served aboard the B-29, pilots, bombardiers, gunners, engineers, have shared their experiences through memoirs, oral history projects, and reunions. Their accounts provide vital insights into the psychological demands of long-range bombing, the technical challenges of operating such a complex aircraft, and the camaraderie that developed among 10-man crews flying into hostile airspace. As the generation of World War II veterans continues to pass, these preserved voices ensure the human experience of the B-29 remains accessible to scholars and the public alike. The aircraft's role in shaping nuclear doctrine has also made it a subject of academic and political analysis. As the delivery vehicle for the world's first atomic weapons, the B-29 occupies a unique space in the history of global conflict. It is studied not only as a machine of war, but as a symbol of the dawn of the nuclear age, a threshold after which military power, diplomacy, and geopolitical risk were permanently altered. In recent years, the B-29 has become a fixture in STEM education and aviation outreach. Restoration projects often involve young engineers, mechanics, and aviation students who gain hands-on experience maintaining and flying complex historical machinery. Museums use the aircraft to teach lessons in physics, aerodynamics, military history, and ethics. The educational value of the B-29 is immense, spanning disciplines and generations. Despite its operational retirement over half a century ago, the B-29 continues to fly, both literally through aircraft like Fifi and Doc, and figuratively in the minds of historians, engineers, and the public. It remains a testament to a transformative moment in history when technology, strategy, and geopolitics converged to change the nature of warfare and diplomacy. The legacy of the Superfortress is not defined solely by its missions or capabilities, but by its impact. It reshaped global conflict, redefined strategic air power, and ushered in the nuclear era. And through continued preservation and public engagement, the memory of the B-29 remains active, not as a relic, but as a living symbol of a pivotal chapter in the history of the modern world. Beyond its well-documented combat role and preserved legacy, the B-29 Superfortress participated in numerous lesser-known operations, technological experiments, and post-war missions that further underscore its versatility and enduring utility. These chapters, often overlooked in conventional histories, reveal how the aircraft served as a testbed for innovation and a quiet workhorse behind pivotal advances in aviation and military science. One of the most significant of these hidden roles involved the support of early nuclear weapons testing. Following the end of World War II, the US military initiated Operation Crossroads in 1946 at Bikini Atoll to evaluate the effects of nuclear weapons on naval vessels. Modified B-29s were assigned to drop test bombs, gather air samples, and photograph the detonations. Crews operating these missions had to follow precise flight paths and time-sensitive maneuvers to avoid the blast wave and radioactive clouds. These operations helped refine both delivery techniques and safety protocols, shaping the early Cold War nuclear strategy. Equally notable was the B-29's involvement in high-altitude atmospheric research. As the US pursued understanding of weather systems, radiation patterns, and upper atmosphere physics, the B-29's ceiling and endurance made it an ideal platform. Aircraft were modified with instrumentation pods and flown into remote atmospheric conditions. Some missions involved sampling cosmic rays and stratospheric particles. Others supported the study of meteorological events that would later inform both aviation safety and early space exploration initiatives. In the realm of aviation technology, the B-29 played a crucial role in jet engine testing. The aircraft's large bomb bays and robust internal structure allowed engineers to mount experimental turbojets beneath the fuselage or on wing pylons. In these configurations, B-29 served as flying laboratories for early jet propulsion systems, including those that would be adopted in the B-47 Stratojet and the F-86 Sabre. The bomber's electrical systems and pressurized cabin allowed onboard technicians to monitor performance data in real time, years before such work became routine in dedicated test platforms. Perhaps the most unusual use of the B-29 occurred in drone development and target practice. Under programs like Operation Aphrodite and later tests in the 1950s, retired B-29s were converted into radio-controlled drones. These QB-29s were flown without crew over remote regions and used to simulate enemy bombers for surface-to-air missile testing. In many cases, they carried sensors and telemetry equipment to assess radar tracking, missile accuracy, and kill probability. Their sacrifice in these roles contributed directly to the development of U.S. air defense systems and the Nike missile program. The aircraft was also a key participant in manned balloon programs such as Project Genetrix, which aimed to gather intelligence over the Soviet Union by launching high-altitude reconnaissance balloons. B-29s supported these missions by tracking and communicating with the balloons, retrieving data packages when they returned to friendly territory. Although largely replaced by satellites in later years, these balloon operations filled critical intelligence gaps in the early Cold War. Another set of forgotten missions involved search and rescue. WB-29s, stripped of their bombing equipment and fitted with rescue gear, operated in remote theaters to locate and support downed pilots and lost aircraft. Their range and loiter time enabled them to conduct extended searches over ocean and jungle environments. These missions, while not glamorous, saved countless lives and established procedures that would be carried forward into Cold War and Vietnam-era rescue operations. In addition to U.S. service, a few B-29s continued to fly in foreign air forces for experimental or niche roles. As mentioned, the Soviet Tu-4 clone was produced in quantity and used for decades. Some Tu-4s were adapted for roles including air-to-air refueling, electronic warfare, and even early airborne warning systems, proving that the underlying design of the Superfortress retained value long after its American retirement. Veterans who participated in these quieter chapters of the B-29's life often recall a different kind of mission, less dramatic than bombing raids, but no less important. Many of them flew in support of scientific teams, test pilots, and early Cold War strategists. Their contributions were rarely publicized, their missions often classified, but their work helped lay the foundation for modern aerospace capabilities. Taken together, these unseen chapters reveal that the B-29 was more than a strategic bomber. It was a dynamic research platform, a Cold War asset, and a bridge between propeller-driven combat aircraft and the jet-powered future. Its adaptability across technical domains ensured that it remained relevant in some capacity for nearly 2 decades after its combat debut. As a result, the true scope of the B-29's legacy cannot be measured solely by its wartime sorties or iconic missions. It also lies in the quiet, persistent ways the aircraft served innovation, exploration, and preparedness, flying not just into battle, but into the unknown. The final chapter of the B-29 Superfortress's service life was shaped not by warfare or testing, but by remembrance. As the aircraft disappeared from active inventories and its roles were taken over by newer jet-powered platforms, it gradually assumed a place within public history, as a physical embodiment of a pivotal era. Yet the path from operational retirement to revered icon was neither immediate nor inevitable. The process of historical preservation, cultural interpretation, and educational integration evolved slowly, driven by veterans, aviation historians, and a growing public desire to understand the technologies that had shaped the 20th century. In the early years after World War II, little institutional effort was made to preserve large aircraft like the B-29. With thousands built and most declared surplus, scrapping was widespread and efficient. The Air Force itself retained only a few representative models for training or static display. It was left to private individuals and non-profit groups to identify the historical value of surviving aircraft and to initiate restoration efforts, often at great cost and difficulty. Many of these early preservationists recovered B-29s from scrapyards, bombing ranges, and remote storage depots where they had deteriorated under exposure to the elements. One of the most dramatic examples of B-29 recovery occurred in Greenland, where a crashed aircraft from a Cold War-era rescue mission, dubbed Keybird, was discovered frozen in a lakebed. In the 1990s, a restoration team attempted to repair and fly it out of the tundra, but the mission ended in tragedy when a fire during taxi tests destroyed the nearly restored aircraft. The effort, though unsuccessful, brought international attention to the complexity and risk involved in restoring heavy bombers. It also underscored the symbolic power that the B-29 continued to hold, decades after its last official mission. Back in the United States, restored B-29s began appearing in museums and air shows by the late 20th century. Public interest in the aircraft surged again during the 1995 controversy surrounding the planned Enola Gay exhibit at the Smithsonian Institution. The exhibit, meant to mark the 50th anniversary of the Hiroshima bombing, sparked fierce debate over how to present the atomic mission, whether as a necessary act of war or a tragic example of modern destruction. Veterans groups and historians clashed over the exhibit's framing, and the final presentation was substantially revised. The controversy reflected broader tensions in how to interpret the B-29's legacy. As a technical achievement, a symbol of victory, or a harbinger of nuclear warfare. Despite such debates, the aircraft has become a fixture in American aviation heritage. Airworthy examples like Fifi and Doc travel the country, offering the public a rare sensory experience of WA-2 aviation. The deep roar of 4 radial engines, the massive size of the airframe, and the sight of a war-era giant airborne once more. These appearances are accompanied by educational programs, veteran interviews, and hands-on cockpit tours, tools that help connect younger generations to the strategic realities of mid-century air power. Museums, too, have adopted increasingly sophisticated approaches to interpreting the B-29. Exhibits now emphasize not only its engineering and wartime missions, but also the lives of its crews, the challenges of maintaining it in combat, and the consequences of its most famous deployments. Curators frequently highlight how the aircraft helped shape the doctrine of strategic bombing and how its very existence accelerated the development of radar, jet propulsion, aerial navigation, and missile systems. As such, the B-29 is now taught not merely as a weapon, but as a system, a nexus of science, logistics, and policy.
Even internationally, the aircraft's significance is recognized. In Japan, monuments and museums mark the destruction wrought by B-29 raids, often blending historical reflection with calls for peace and disarmament. In the UK, B-29s, known locally as Washingtons, are remembered for their brief role in post-war RAF operations. In Russia, the reverse-engineered Tu-4 is acknowledged as a turning point in Soviet aviation. These perspectives show how the B-29's reach extended across cultures and ideologies, impacting not only wartime adversaries but shaping the balance of post-war global power. As of today, fewer than 30 complete B-29s survive worldwide, and only 2 remain airworthy. Yet the aircraft's footprint continues to grow through digital archives, virtual reconstructions, and high-resolution 3D modeling. Educational institutions now incorporate the B-29 into courses on military history, aerospace engineering, and even international relations. It has become, in many respects, a platform not just for bombs, but for understanding. The B-29's transition from strategic tool to historical touchstone reflects the evolution of air power itself, from blunt force to complex influence, from immediate effect to long-term consequence. As it rests in hangars, soars in flyovers, or appears on screen, the Superfortress continues to do what it was built for: command attention, deliver impact, and define the era in which it flew. Its engines may be quiet now, but its legacy continues to echo across generations, borders, and disciplines. As the decades passed, the B-29 Superfortress's influence extended well beyond its operational lifespan, shaping not only strategic doctrine and aviation engineering, but also the fundamental structure of the modern military-industrial complex. While its engines no longer thundered above the Pacific or Korea, the technological lineage it began continued through successive generations of aircraft, strategic systems, and international postures. The B-29 had become more than a machine. It had become a prototype for how air power would be imagined, developed, and deployed in the atomic age and beyond. One of the most direct technological descendants of the B-29 was the Convair B-36 Peacemaker. Often described as an intercontinental bomber, the B-36 incorporated the lessons learned from the B-29's range, altitude, and payload limitations. It featured 6 radial engines with 4 auxiliary jet engines and could deliver nuclear weapons from bases in the US to virtually any point on the globe without refueling. The conceptual DNA of the B-29, long-range penetration, high-altitude bombing, and large-format weapon delivery, was visibly embedded in the B-36's mission profile. The B-29 also contributed significantly to the evolution of aerial refueling doctrine. Early experiments with KB-29 tankers laid the groundwork for the air refueling strategies used by the U.S. Air Force throughout the Cold War. These innovations enabled global bomber patrols, a critical capability once nuclear deterrence became a permanent fixture of American defense policy. Without the B-29's pioneering role in these technologies, the operational strategies of aircraft like the B-47 Stratojet and B-52 Superfortress might have looked very different. Its impact wasn't limited to technology alone. The B-29 helped institutionalize strategic bombing as a core tenet of American military thinking. While the concept had been tested in Europe with the B-17, it was the B-29's role in Japan, especially in the atomic missions, that cemented strategic air power as the dominant military philosophy of the early Cold War. Institutions like the Strategic Air Command were built on the belief that wars could be won, or prevented, by the threat or use of long-range bombers. This belief influenced everything from base architecture and deployment patterns to the education of Air Force officers at institutions like the Air War College. The B-29 also reshaped civil-military relations in subtle but enduring ways. Its enormous cost, development complexity, and logistical demands required close collaboration between government agencies, private industry, and scientific communities. The scale of the program foreshadowed the integrated defense industry that would characterize the Cold War era, with Boeing and its subcontractors emerging as long-term defense partners. The organizational models used to develop and produce the B-29, especially those involving compartmentalization, testing protocols, and systems integration, set patterns that continued in projects ranging from the U-2 to the Apollo space program. Even outside military contexts, the legacy of the B-29 touched commercial and scientific aviation. Its pressurized cabin technology informed post-war airliner development, particularly the Boeing 307 Stratoliner and, eventually, the 707. The operational data gathered from B-29 long-range missions contributed to the establishment of global air traffic control systems, weather forecasting models, and Arctic flight navigation, all of which became critical to both civil aviation and Cold War surveillance operations. Internationally, the ripple effects of the B-29 program were profound. The Soviet Union's reverse engineering of the aircraft into the Tu-4 sparked an arms race in bomber development that persisted for decades. The Tu-4 itself was later adapted into the Tu-70 transport and the Tu-80 strategic bomber prototype. The drive to counter or match the B-29's capabilities became a defining feature of Soviet air strategy in the late 1940s and 1950s, leading to the development of the Tu-95, one of the longest-serving bombers in history. In Japan, the B-29 became a symbol of both devastation and transformation. Post-war reconstruction efforts often began in cities flattened by Superfortress raids. Yet the experience of being subjected to strategic bombing also influenced Japan's post-war constitution, particularly Article 9, which renounced the right to wage war. In this way, the B-29 contributed indirectly to Japan's modern pacifist identity and its distinctive security policies under the US-Japan alliance. Culturally, the B-29 has remained a subject of reflection, representation, and reinterpretation. Documentaries, historical monographs, and museum exhibits continue to explore its role in shaping the 20th century. Its silhouette, sleek, powerful, and unmistakable, has come to symbolize not just a weapon, but an era. In academic discussions, the aircraft is frequently invoked in analyses of deterrence, ethical warfare, and the mechanics of technological escalation. As a result, the B-29's legacy endures across disciplines and domains. It is studied not only by military historians, but by political scientists, aerospace engineers, ethicists, and curators. It is part of the conversation not only about how wars are fought, but about how societies remember, interpret, and learn from the machinery of their past. Its riveted aluminum skin carries the weight not just of bombs, but of decisions that shaped the post-war world order. The B-29 Superfortress did not simply fly missions, it defined pathways. Pathways for future aircraft, for Cold War diplomacy, for technological systems, and for cultural memory. Its influence is not confined to hangars and museums, but woven into the structure of the modern era itself. Today, the B-29 Superfortress stands as one of the most influential aircraft ever built, an engineering milestone that helped bring an end to the deadliest conflict in human history, and a machine that ushered in a fundamentally new era of warfare, diplomacy, and global power dynamics. Its legacy is not confined to the pages of World War II history or the specific missions over Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. Rather, it has become a reference point for the emergence of strategic air power for the age of nuclear deterrence and for the intersection of industrial-scale technology and geopolitical force. The aircraft's design reflected the bold ambition of mid-20th century military planning. It was not just built to outperform previous bombers, it was intended to change the nature of combat itself. Its pressurized cabin, advanced fire control systems, and unprecedented range and payload capacity created a platform that allowed for operations on a truly global scale. And although its combat record was most famously cemented in the Pacific, the B-29's true strategic value was as a signal to the world. The United States now possessed the capability to project overwhelming power anywhere on Earth. The use of the B-29 in delivering atomic weapons transformed it from a conventional bomber into the defining symbol of the nuclear age. This transformation marked a turning point in human history. For the first time, the outcome of a global conflict was determined not by prolonged attrition or ground occupation, but by a single aircraft delivering a single weapon with catastrophic effect. The B-29 thus became not only a tool of military execution, but an embodiment of the ethical, philosophical, and existential questions that would haunt the post-war world. The aircraft's influence on strategic thought was equally transformative. From 1945 onward, every major power in the world re-evaluated its military doctrine in light of what the B-29 had demonstrated. Concepts such as deterrence, second strike capability, and mutually assured destruction found their roots in the demonstration of what long-range bombers could do with nuclear payloads. Even after the bomber itself was replaced by faster, higher-flying jet aircraft, the doctrinal foundations it helped establish continued to guide strategic planning for decades. In its post-war and peacetime roles, the B-29 adapted to support scientific advancement, humanitarian missions, technological research, and Cold War readiness. Whether flying into nuclear clouds to collect data, helping develop air-to-air refueling, or enabling weather tracking across the oceans, the Superfortress became one of the most versatile aircraft of its time. It was no longer simply a machine of destruction, it was a bridge to the future of flight, of defense systems, and of aerospace knowledge. The aircraft also became a focal point for memory and commemoration. Through preservation efforts, museum installations, and public education programs, the B-29 has remained present in the historical consciousness of multiple generations. Restored aircraft like Fifi and Doc are not mere relics of aluminum and steel. They are living archives, maintained in flight condition to ensure that the complexity, cost, and consequence of mid-century strategic aviation is never reduced to abstraction. Yet the legacy of the B-29 is not without controversy. It invites difficult conversations about the ethics of total war, the civilian toll of strategic bombing, and the responsibility of scientific and industrial power. It poses uncomfortable questions about what constitutes necessary force, and what costs are borne in the pursuit of victory. These debates are not relics of the past. They remain central to how societies today interpret the intersection of warfare, technology, and humanity. As historians, engineers, veterans, and civilians continue to examine its history, the B-29 endures not because of what it destroyed, but because of what it represented. The technological leap into a new form of warfare, the industrial capability of a nation at total mobilization, and the moral complexity of wielding unprecedented power. Its story is not just one of combat sorties and mechanical innovation, but one of reflection on the choices made, the lives affected, and the world irrevocably changed. In every sense, the B-29 was a harbinger, not only of victory in war, but of the responsibilities that come with power, the dual-use nature of technology, and the enduring challenge of reconciling progress with consequence. It remains a cornerstone of aviation history, a subject of scholarly debate, and a monument in motion. Its shadow casts long over the second half of the 20th century and into the present day.